Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Alfian and today we are going to solve the Hackerrank challenge on the React section called the patient medical records. And for this challenge, we will create a React application called the patient medical records that allows user to view and cycle through patients' medical records. The application requirements are outlined below and your finished implementation must pass all of the provided unit tests. And for the detailed requirement, do take notes that the application consists of two components. They are search and records components, and for the search component, it contains a drop-down select menu and a show button, and for the records, it somehow displaying all of the table of the patient medical records and also includes the next button to navigate to the next patient records, which is also the same function as the search component, maybe a little bit different. And for the number 2, the search component must have a drop-down select menu populated with 3 patient names from a file named the medical records.js, and we will open this later. And for the by default, the drop-down should display select patient with both selected and disabled attributes. So for the select patient, for the initial drop-down menu, it should have a disabled button that is not selected any of the patients. And when the application is first loaded, no record table or next button should be visible. And for the first initialization of the application of the patient medical records, we should not have any record table or the next button because the select drop-down has not been selected yet. So in order to make the application synchronize between components, then for the initial initialization, we should not show the medical records and the next button because we haven't select anything from the drop-down menu. And for the show button functionality, if the user clicks show without selecting a patient, an alert should appear with the message, please select a patient name. And this alert function, the JavaScript, since we are using TypeScript, we can utilize the JavaScript built-in alert function, and we will show you about it later. And then the message says please select a patient name, and we will pass this sentence as a string inside the alert function parameter. And if a patient is selected, clicking show should display a table containing all of the selected patient's details and medical records. The table must also include a next button to navigate through records. So in short, if we selected, let's say we select John Doe inside the drop down, and then we are clicking the show button, and then the medical records of John Doe will appear at the bottom or the side of the screen, and then the next button will also show beside the table. And then the selecting show, if the drop down selection select the one of the patients, then the table will shows, and it will also triggers the next function to be shown on the screen. And for the next button functionality, clicking next should display the medical records for the next patient in the list based on their ID. So from the medical records.js, it has some kind of data that we can scroll through the patients based on their ID and displays all of the medical records between them. And for the next button, it's like the show button, but we scroll through using the ID of the patient, and then we can scroll through the table that contains the data of the patient, and then also the patient name and also the patient status and their respective data. And if the last patient's records are being displayed, clicking next should loop back to the first patient's records So it's like some kind of carousel, or if it's already on the edge of the data. Let's say if the if there are only 3 data of the patients, then after the ID number 3, then we can go back to the number 1 if we click on the next button. So it's like looping through the next button. And then for the sample interaction, we do take notes of the initial state. The select menu displays the select patient and no records or next button is visible. And for the user action 1, the user selects patient from the drop-down menu and click show. And for the patient details and records appear in a table along with the next button. And also the same for the user action 2 is for the test cases, and we will go through this later. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the coding. Yep, so let's minimize the description and make our workspace wider. And this is the instruction, and somehow I think the search and records are on this is the search section, the component, and this is the records component that has the table right here. They are wrapped as a children component of the app. Maybe it is. Let's scroll to the app. Okay, so this is the app functionalities, and the children, yeah, it has the search and records, and this is the main component right here, the app.js. And then for the records, let's scroll through this. Yeah, we have the records, and this is for the table purpose, displaying all of the table and the table renderer, and this is the SR, the date, diagnosis, weight, and doctor. And this is the table data that we need to show the data of every patient. And the search, which is right here, it's only John Oliver. I'm clicking show, does nothing. Okay, so if we look over the Explorer right here, we can see the medical records. And to make this easier, we can copy all of this and paste in our text editor, your favorite text editor, and let's display besides. Yeah, my text editor doesn't have any code minimizing or like code block minimize, unlike this one. We expand and minimize the range or collapse, then it will show the actual data between. It's in the form of array of object, and the object contains the ID and data of the patient. So this is a good start. And the medical records.js, we should not modify anything inside this medical records data. So let's work on the search. Let's go back to the description. For the initial state, the select menu displays select patient, no records or next button is visible. So we need to eliminate the next and patient name because we haven't selected anything yet. And in order to make the next and the table and the patient name, DOB and height is not visible, we need to somehow pass in the ID of the selected patient right here, because we haven't selected anything of the show button. Then we need some kind of the centralized state, maybe inside the app.js, that the app will act as the parents of both the show drop down and the next button right here. And then the app.js will manage the states between the children, and the children will communicate with each other using the app as the parent. And then we can define the state on the app.js. Since we already have the search with the props of set record and set ID, and then the ID we might use them later, but for now let's define the ID and site ID on the app with the useState with the constant, and declare the ID or set ID, and set ID, and then declare the useState. Don't forget to declare the useState on the top of the file, React, and then comma, and with the curly brackets declare the useState inside it, and then it will be declared right here. Somehow it will not automatically appear. Maybe it's because of the application environment. And the useState, we can declare the 0 as the first initialization, or we can set null. And then for the search.js, since we have the props of set records, set ID and ID, then we can pass in the callback function of the set ID, so the children, which is the search component, can communicate with the state of the app.js. And for the set ID props, we can pass in the set ID, and then that way the search props will trigger this set ID props, and then it will call back to the main app.js props that triggers this set ID of the useState right here. So that way the ID and set ID will also controls the rendering of the records element or the records component right here. That's the uniqueness of the React application that we might have not know it yet. A set ID, and then the state is new, and for the ID we can pass in the ID and ID, and we can use the set ID props, and this is the select drop down, the select patient, and the default value is 0. Option value 0 is disabled by default, it's grayed out, and it's on the disabled attribute right here for the option. And then we need to render using the map, and in order to display all the patient's data with the records from the medical records, it's already declared right here, and we can declare the medical records. Medical records the map, it's an array of object. The map, it takes the data and the index as the parameter, and for the callback, since we are directly rendering inside the renderer, return renderer, then we can use the parenthesis, and then pressing enter. And for this option we can copy this and paste inside this right here, so that way we are populating all of the options inside the select tag. And then for the value we can pass in the value of, using the curly brackets, using the index +1, since the index starting from 0, then we can +1 that starts from 1 instead of 0, because 0 is already defined right here with the select. Since the 0 option is already selected here with the select patient already declared here, so we use the option value of the value of 1, and then 2, and then 3 of the select patient. And then for the select patient we can change this to the actual patient name of the data. Let's scroll through the data. For the medical records, let's display on this side right here. The map data, the data, let's delete the disabled attribute, because we have to select anything from the disabled. If it's disabled, then we cannot select anything. Okay, so for the object, it's the data right here. The object, we can pass in the data dot data. This is the data. The object right here, it's the data because we are using the map, and we are choosing between the ID and data. We are choosing the data, and the property data, we can use the index number 0 because it's in the form of array. Yeah, it's medical records of one patient. Then we can use the index number 0 to fetch the name of the patient. It has ID, timestamp, diagnosis. Then we can pass in the diagnosis. Let's collapse this, and vitals, collapse this. Doctor name, we can use later, and meta, we can use it later. And we pass in the data dot username. Okay, so let's select, and it's showing John Oliver, 2 John Olivers, Bob Martin. If you already know, it has not been deleted yet, so let's eliminate this from the selection because we already declare it using the medical records.map. Okay, John Oliver, Bob Martin, and then the Helena Fernandez. Okay, so the show button has not been functioning properly. The hyphen test ID patient name with value 0, and we can pass in the attribute of the onChange right here. Maybe it's onSelect or onChange, I don't know. Let's test this out using the onChange attribute because the select tag, it has the data hyphen select ID, data hyphen test ID, and maybe the React testing library will test right here, so that's why we using onChange attribute right here. onChange, of the onChange, we can use the set ID, pass in the set ID that takes the value. In order to get the value, then we need to pass in the callback function or the anonymous array function of the e, and then set ID, and use the curly brackets or not. E set ID, and then that takes the e target value. Let's test this selection using some kind of console.log. Since the set ID is on the app.js, then we can use the useEffect. useEffect that tracks the change of the ID, and then it will render inside the console.log. Not console.log. It will render inside the console every time we change the ID. That tracks the ID as the dependency of the useEffect. Don't forget to declare the useEffect. useEffect, and pass in the console.log inside the anonymous function. console.log id. Let's eliminate this and reload, and select patient John Oliver. Okay, so the useEffect has been triggered successfully. If we choose Bob Martin, we get 2, and for the Helena Fernandez, we got 3. You might be wondering why I got 1, 2, and 3. It's because the useState attributes takes the e parameter right here, and the e of the target property, and the value that takes the value of the selection tag right here, and for the default value is 0, and if we select anything for the value 0. If we don't select a patient, it will stays at 0 value. And then for the first initialization, we declare the useState of the ID and set ID as the null, and then it's rendered as the null for the initialization because we explicitly define it. And then for the option value, that using the index 0 plus 1 is equals to 1, and then the value will be passed to the E, and then that takes the value right here, and then the value will be passed to the parents, which is the app.js. So that's why we got the numbers from the useEffect right here. So for the next one, let's make the show button works after selecting one of the drop down right here for the show. That triggers the render of the next button and then the table render. The show is still inside the search.js. Let's look for the show, and the button has the data-SID, so it tells us to work or modify something inside here because it has the data-SID. I'm kind of forgetting which attribute that we need to use in order to make the show renders the patient name and triggers the rendering of the next button. We can use the button, okay, you guess it, using the onClick attribute. And for the onClick attribute, we set the set ID. Okay, so for this button right here, with the onClick function, we can pass in the set record. But before that, we need to declare the set record props right here that pass on the app.js as the parent. Don't forget to do this using the accounts record and set record. You guess it, using the useState. For the useState, initial value will be null, I think, and then we can change this later. For the set record, we can pass in the set record as the props, and then pass in the actual function of the useState, so the search can modify the state right here as the children, and then takes the set record using the set record of the ID, I think, using the ID that we already passed from the parents of the app.js, the ID, and then the ID state will be passed on as the props right here to the search component, so the search can know which ID is already being defined from the app.js, and then we can set record of the patient ID based on their ID on click show. And then for the app.js, for the records, we can pass in the props, so the records can know which ID is being rendered from the communication between the app.js and search.js by passing the ID of the patient that takes the ID state as the property. And then for the records, we can declare the props and then destructure the props. We can declare the props right here as the props, and then for the renderer, let's say we can use the constant props using the double S, and then the text the props dot. Okay, let me see, props.id, I think. Let me test the props. Maybe you haven't know what prop is. I will show you shortly about what is the props and what is the purpose of the props that pass from the apps.js on the records that takes the ID props and then passing the ID, and then if we trigger something from the search, let's select defer, and then since we already declared the useEffect right here of the console.log of the props, and that takes the props as a dependency, and then for the records using the props that pass from the records ID right here, the props acts as the main object of the ID or set ID. Let's say if we have search, and then we have the set ID props and the ID props and the set record props, and this is the one of the functions, one of the uniqueness of the React application. These three properties right here of the search, and it's the set ID and the set record. From the search, we already destructured those three for the set record, set ID, and ID. So for the records, if we pass in only the ID props, and then the text the ID state right here, and then for the records, the inside the parameter of the records is a props. Then for the useEffect of the console.log props, props is a form of an object, so it's the same function as is the same definition. If we destructure right here, if you notice the curly brackets right here, it's in a form of destructuring the props. If we destructure the ID, it's still a props, but we already destructured it using the ID, and it takes the ID, and the dependency of the useEffect is ID. Then if we change the John Oliver, then it rendered 2 times, because one is from the app.js useEffect, and another one is from the useEffect of the records.js right here. So if we take only the props, let's undo this using the props, and then the ID is null, and then selecting John Oliver, and then this props is act as an object that takes the ID. We declare right here ID props, and ID is 1, is just the same as earlier, but this one is more verbose. And if we can declare the properties right here, if we choose the Bob Martin, and then it works as the same thing. That takes the props ID. Let's choose the John Oliver again. It only renders 1 time, not 2 times, because the props we already declare the dependency of the props specifically using the ID. Okay, so I'm blabbering too much about this, I'm sorry. Let's eliminate the props. I'm using this as the example. If you want to destructure it like this, you can do that, but for the sake of the video, for the education, I'm using the props explicitly. And let's maximize our workspace. It's already taking the ID state right here, passing the ID. Let's somehow render the ID and render the next button. Let's look for the next button. Is the button. Okay, so this one, button tag of the next button. We can pass in the disabled attribute that checks if the props.id is null. If it's null, then it returns true, and then the next button will be disabled. Oh, it's not disabled, but we should make the next button disappear instead of disable. Let's make this invisible. Make the next button and the table invisible before we select anything. If we haven't select anything, then the table and the next button and the patient name, DOB and height will be invisible. So let's collapse this. Since the button of the next button already declared here, let's collapse this part, and maybe it's the patient name, DOB section and height section that we collapse right here. And for the layout row right here, for the div tag right here, it's maybe the header of this part of the patient name until the next button. Let's collapse this. And also for the table of the ID of patient records table, and this is the actual table. Let's collapse this, and we need to make the entire thing disappears because we haven't selected anything yet. So let's for this div, let's comment this out using the control and the forward slash. Okay, so it disappears completely. Let's undo this, make disappear again. Let's copy this and make this disappear temporarily. And we can declare a check above it, and then we will render the content later if the check is true by using the passing the ID. If the ID is not falsy, or if it's not a null value, then we can render the main component of the records.js using the double ampersand sign or the short circuit operator. If this ID is true, then we render something, and if the ID is false or the fallacy value such as null, 0, empty string, or false or undefined, then it will not print anything. Since we are using the already on the return, then we can use the renderer of the HTML using the parenthesis right here. Don't forget, React always use this one for the render purpose. And let's paste the one that we commented out on the below, and it's showing the red underlines. Let's undo this, and since we are rendering two or more without the actual parent or the div, without just one div, it will be a little bit tricky. And to solve that, we can use the fragment tag without defining the tag, and it's okay. And then we can enter and render or paste the actual table and the next button inside this fragment tag right here. So it's no longer showing the red underline, and because the ID has not been declared yet, we declare props instead. Then we can pass in the props.id. Okay, so it's now working, and it's not showing anything on the renderer window right here. If we select the John Oliver, it shows, but we are not supposed to render anything yet before we click on the show button and then triggers the renderer right here on the records.js. So let's instead use the set record. Let's use the set record and record state that we pass in from the search component using the set record props. And then for the show, it acts as the trigger, and the triggers the set record that pass in the ID, and then the record right here will be triggered. And then for the record, we can pass in the record equals to record. We can pass in the state as the props of the record. And then for the props, instead of using ID, then we can use the record. Okay, let's run this. Again, John Oliver, it's still showing because the props.records is still showing the ID. Let's eliminate the ID from the props, so we only take the records. We only take the record instead of the ID, and if we use the ID, then it will render because the prep has still the ID. So so don't worry about this warning. Let's select John Oliver. Okay, it's still showing the patient name. Okay, so I think I found the problem here. If we still have the props that takes the set record of the record right here, and then we render the props dot record, and if let's reload this. Okay, don't worry about this. Once again, let's eliminate this. If we select a patient, it should not render any of these patient name, DOB, and the next renderer, and instead we are supposed to use the show button. If we click right here, and then the next button and the patient name and the table, all of them will render after we click on the show button instead of this selection right here. I think I found the root problem or the core problem. It's from the FGS. It works as it's supposed to do, and if we look over the search.js, we directly passing the set record with the parameter of ID. If we use the set record only like this, then the set record will not be triggered automatically because it's not considered a direct function call. But if we pass in the parameter of the ID right here, it triggers on the selection right here because the search.js triggers the set record of the ID on the renderer or the state change of the search.js. So in React, we should pass in the anonymous function using the anonymous function, and let's make the workspace wider. We pass in the anonymous function, and then using the arrow function that takes the set record of the parameter ID and then wrap it inside the curly brackets right here. So let's make this easier to see. Maybe this is the problem all along. and that makes us stuck in one point. So let's reload this. Okay, so select John Oliver. It's no longer rendering the set record or selecting the or triggering the set record function that passing the ID that makes the app.js communicate with the records.js, because the ID has been defined instead of null. And then because it's wrapped in an arrow function, but it's anonymous arrow function, so it's not rendered directly. So if we use the show, then it's rendered correctly. So let's solve the one with the key problem. Maybe it's inside the records.js. Unique key prop render method of search. Okay, so for the search.js. Okay, so for this map, it's passing the data as the parameter, and for this option right here in React, for the map function as the renderer inside the return value inside the return statement. For the map, for the direct render of the map of the multiple HTML tags of the option, especially function right here, we need to pass in the key, and the key that takes a unique value, and we can pass in the index of the map iteration right here. So let's reload this to see if the error disappears. Okay, so the key problem has been solved successfully. Let's move on to the next one. We select John Oliver, we need to show, and let's test for the empty empty selecting patient without selecting any of the drop down, which is value of 0. And for the show, it's not rendering anything. Let's select John Oliver. It's rendering, but it's not showing the actual patient name. So let's make this happen by modifying the records.js. And then for the records.js, let's make our workspace bigger again. On the props record, this is the database ID of the patient profile, and this is the patient name. Then we can pass in the heading for. Instead of the patient name, we need to render the actual patient name, which is the username property right here. And of the record property that we already passed from the main.app.js, then we can use the record, not the record, but from the data right here, medical records, since we already this Hackerrank challenge already specified the import of medical records, and we can utilize this medical underscore records, and then map, not map, but okay. So since on the search.js, since we are using the site ID and ID state instead of the site ID of the target value of the ID from the option value 1 and 2. If we choose the John Oliver, he has the ID of 1 and it follows the ID of 1 right here. But what if the patient ID is 10 and then 3 and then it's like randomized ID? We don't want that to happen. But for the value right here of the set ID, we can change this as the indexes of the object inside the array of objects right here, instead of using the ID of the string one, and it will be complicated. But if you want to use that, you can do so. And for the value, we can pass in the I plus 1, and then for the target value property, we can pass in the -1. So after we incrementing by 1 of the index 1, and then we, instead of using I plus 1 from the index right here, which is 1, 2, and 3, we can change the option value of that takes the ID string right here of every patient inside the array of objects, and this ID of 2 and this one is ID of 3. Let's collect this and takes the data. We can use the data.id. Yeah, we can pass that data.id. We are passing data with the ID property, and then it will take the ID of 1. Okay, so what is this? Failed to compile. Oh, it's because the medical records that, yes, we haven't completed the code yet. So the medical records, we can use the find the data. We can, because we are scoring or looking over the array of objects, we cannot use the direct property of the object, but instead we can use find. We need to find the data based on the ID of the object right here. Find the data, takes the data, and then using the arrow, not this one. Let's enlarge our workspace. Okay, so where we were. Okay, so for the find data, and then we can use the arrow function and compare the data dot id, and if it's strictly equals to the record, to the props record, which is the ID that we selected, and then it will show the patient name. Let's hope if it's really working. Let's try John Oliver. Okay, so error occurred in the h4 component, which is this one that we declared right here, and then we forgot, not we, but I forgot to use the pass in the data that we already accessed using the find method, and data that takes the data is the array of object, and we can access the first data because it's the medical records of one patient that has different doctor's name and the diagnosis data. And then for the username, it has the same thing because it is the same ID of the patient. Okay, so it's John Oliver, it's also John Oliver, and for the bottom one, which will be also John Oliver, then we can just pass in the first element of the data array of object, that takes the user name. After we look over the first element of the data, then we can pass in the username property right here. So let's select a patient, John Oliver. Let's hope. Okay, so John Oliver is working and be rendered successfully. I'm sorry. And for the DOB, we can pass in the date of birthday, just the same as the username. So we can copy this and paste on the DOB. After the DOB, it has the curly brackets of the patient DOB. It's declared as the variable, and pass in the medical records, find data based on the ID from the records from the selected useState record from the search.js that we are using the show button right here, and takes the first index of the data of the medical records of one patient, and takes the instead of the username, it's rendered also John Oliver right here. Then we can pass in the user DOB. It's already in a form of string, so we don't have to worry about converting it, but we need to convert something later on this tutorial. So for the patient height, we can directly pass in the medical records, and we can use the meta property right here that takes the height property. Then we can pass in the meta dot height, and the height is 168. Okay, so for the medical records, let's render this medical records of one patient named John Oliver. This is the table header, th, sl, and date, diagnosis, weight, and doctor. For the td of the table data, since it's wrapped in a table row, then we need to, since we have a bunch of medical records of one patient, then we can use, you guess it, using the map as usual. Let's comment this. Before comment this, we need to copy this part, and then let's comment this out using the control and / on your keyboard. And for the table body of the data hypothesize ID of the patient table, we can use the map of the medical records. Yeah, we already declared here medical records, put map, mapping the data right here, tabulating it, mapping the data, and then okay, let me rewrite it again. The data, not just the data, but the index of the data. So let's use this parenthesis and render the table row. Okay, select this of John Oliver. Let's show this. Okay, so it's now rendering 3 table bodies, not 3 table bodies, but 3 table rows, because we are mapping the table rows. And then of course we have the unique key problem right here. So since the tr is the parent of all of these tds, then we can use the key property and just pass in the index as the unique parameter right here. So it's no longer showing an error. Let's tabulate the data from the array of objects into the actual table data right here, so we can see the window render right here. Okay, let me see. Not medical records, but for this inside the TD of the SR right here, that takes the, maybe it's the number or the indexer. We can use the index. So let's test this out. For the SR, it's starting from 0. We don't want that. Instead, we can align this with using +1. So it's starting from the number 1. So for the date column, for the data, we can pass in the data dot. Okay, I might be forgetting this one. It's not medical records because we already selecting the actual patient that we should display the data of the selected patient instead of rendering all of the medical records right here. Okay, so my bad, it's a mistake on my part. Let's solve this by using the medical records and then find the index, because we need to find the index, not find index but just find. Let's try this. Find and select the, okay, so find the data of the, find the data right here, which is the data, and this one is also the data, and this one is also the data parameter that takes the data.id is strictly equals to the data.id right here. Is if it's equal to the record of the props record that we already pass in props record. If it is, then we need to pass in the data, chain it with the data property. If we already found the medical record, which object that we need to find using the data, using the ID, the property right here that compares it against the records that we already choose from the drop down. We found the first one. We found the desired data that we want based on the ID property right here, and then we already found the object we want. Then we can pass in the data property right here. Then the data, since the data has the array of objects, then we can use the map again of the data because it's already on the medical records section of the map right here. So for the data, it's the map of the data. So let's use, instead of the data, I don't want to make you confused, we can use the element or the records. Okay, record, okay, just the record of the selected patient. This is the array of records inside the data property right here, and this is the records, and also the records object of record again. The data property has a bunch of records. Okay, so forgive me for my broken English, I'm still learning just like we are in this video. Okay, so let's use the record that takes the, okay, so this is the date. We can use the timestamp. Yeah, this is this one, the date of the records of one record. Let me see, maybe the timestamp is the actual date record right here of the medical record of one patient. We haven't found anything that resembles the date of the medical record. So for the doctor, and this doctor ID and the user DOB, it's only the date of birthday of the user. So we don't have anything other than the timestamp, so let's use this record the timestamp. And then for the TD or the third TD, which is the diagnosis, we can use the diagnosis and you passing the name property record diagnosis and takes the name. And for the fourth one, which is the weight, maybe it's the weight of the patient, not the doctor. Yes, it's the meta. Okay, record meta and takes the weight property right here. And the last TD, which is the doctor name, that's it, using the record doctor and takes the name. Let's select the journal one. Let's show this. Okay, so it's the actual data. Okay, this is the white tracker, I suppose. This is the doctor names. Okay, yeah, this is the diagnosis of the health problem name. Okay, so let's convert this epoch date to the actual using the Unix timestamp. I think let's use the Unix timestamp convert. Oh, this one, September 15 of 2019. Okay, so this is the Unix timestamp. Let's go back to this part and let's convert the timestamp into the actual string date. Let me see. We can declare a function called the date converter. Date converter takes the timestamp, and then for the function we can declare the const date that takes the new date of the timestamp. And then for the const of the year, since it's in the form of, okay, let's declare the return early using the date TD and then the month and then the actual year. Date, month and year. So for the year variable we can define maybe the date. I think Date.getFullYear using the getFullYear function right here. And for the month we can use the Date.getMonth right here. And for the const day the date, we can use the Date.getDate. Okay, so it's already provided right here, get date. So for the return we take the date number and the month number and also the year number in the form of 4 digits for the year. So let's use the date converter to convert the record timestamp right here. Let's use the parenthesis and the date converter. Okay, so let's select the journal level. Let's show this. Okay, it's maybe it's a little bit off right here of the selected. Since it's September, then we need to show, instead of 8 we need to show 9. So let's test out of the another timestamp using the second data right here of this one, pulmonary embolism, I think, and this is the timestamp. Maybe it's the actual one, so let's convert this. It's August of the 2nd August of the 2019, I think. It's 6 years ago, and it's showing July, which is the 7th. August is 8th. So for the get month, I think we need to add by 1. Okay, so it's not working as expected. I think it's working. So let's use the next. No, the next it's not working yet. Let's show Bob Marley. Okay, let's enlarge this part. Select Helena Fernandez. So this part, and yeah, the data working as expected. No out of bounds. Okay, so make the next button function and scroll through the patient name. Aside from using this drop down, we can use the next button right here. So for the next button is declared right here. Let's see where is the next button. Let's look for the search or the next button. Okay, this one, next button. Let's make the next button scroll through the patient name or the patient record. Maybe it's for the convenience purpose. Okay, let me see. Using the onClick, and for the onClick, since we don't have any some sort of state change in order to make the records component communicate with the app.js. So because the app.js has the centralized state variables right there, so we need to declare another props, which is the set record, and then passing the set record, and then it's like a controller, and then we can use this inside the records using the onClick, and then triggers. Don't forget to use the anonymous function of the set records, props set records, props set records, that takes the another. Okay, so let's use something else. We don't have to populate this part because it's a render. We need to define a more clean code approach by using some kind of next patient function. onClick that takes the next patient function, and for the next patient function we can declare the constant next patient of the arrow function, and we don't have to pass in parameter. So that's why for the next patient, we don't have to use or wrapping inside the anonymous arrow function right here on the onClick, because we don't pass anything as the parameter right here. So for the next patient, we can take the props of the set record that takes the previous value. And so I took some time to write this code, and it's confusing for me at least. And for this one, that we have medical records that has every ID of 1 and 2 and 3, like this one of the ID property right here. And for the next patient, after we showing the patient, if we use the onClick function on the next patient function, check if the ID is on the last index. If it is, we declare the last index of the medical records that takes the length. Since the medical records only have 3 records, then that takes the length of the record, which is 3, and then minus by 1, and then we got the actual index, which is 2 of the last index. And if it's true, check if the ID is on the last index. If it's true, return to the first ID of first index. So we declare on the props of the set record right here, of the props set record, that we are communicating with the main app.js of the set record props right here, and props.setRecord as the state function, and that takes the previous ID that we declare right here from the search.js on the option function, on the option attribute that takes the value, if you remember about that. And we declare our current index that takes the medical records and find the index function. This one is to find the index that takes the data right here, the data object right here, iterating the data, and then compare the compare the data.id property, and to check if it's strictly equals to the previous index of the set record right here on the record useState. And we can get the current index of the array of object right here. This one is the index number 0, and this one index number 1 is, this one is index number 2, and we get the current index. Let's check if it's true. If the current index is equals to the last index, if it's true, then return to the first ID of the first index. Then if it's true, then since the first index is always on the 0, then we can simply pass in the 0 as the first element that takes the ID, and takes the ID as the property right here. And then we can pass in the state ID to the set record as the record variable of the useState. So if it's not the current index or the last index, which is the current index, to check if it's already on the edge of the index right here, so to prevent out of bound. After we, let's say it's this one is Helena, contains the data of Helena, and then we need to scroll back to the John Oliver, I think, John Oliver data, in order to move this one. If we click on the next button, then we scroll back to the first data, this one that does it all. If the current index is equals to the last index of the medical records array, then we return to the first array. Else, if it's let's say if we already on the first, which is the John Oliver, then we can scroll through this one to the data. If we already here, then after we click on the next button, we are directed to the next data, which is the Helena Fernandez. If it's else, then return to the medical records of the current index plus 1 that takes the current index of the, let's say if the current index of the previous value is 0 from the data.id that we pointed out right here with the find index. If it's 0, then we define the 0 plus 1, which is equals medical 0 of the index number 1, which is the the next one from the John Oliver data that takes the ID right here, and then we declare the ID as the records of the set record useState right here. So let's, without further ado, let's show this, and it should return an alert of alerting the, oh, we haven't defined the alert. Let's define the alert. Let's see, on the show it's placed on the set record right here. Okay, so instead of using the set record directly, we can define a function of the show to make a check. Constant show data function with the as the arrow function right here. Okay, it's kinda laggy. Okay, it's arrow function, and for the show data, the set record ID, we can delete this and use the show data, pass in on the show data function, and the set record check if the ID is equals to 0, then we return, then we alert saying, the alert says if we haven't selected anything, then we show an alert. But for now, let's use the alert. Where is the alert message? Okay, please select a patient name. Please select a patient name. Okay, so let's use this. So okay, it didn't show anything, so we can use console.log because we are in a specific environment of the React application right here of the Hackerrank. Then we can use the console.log. Please select patient name. Please select a patient name. Okay, so let's use this. Okay, maybe the ID is null. Check the ID if it's null instead of 0, because 0 is different than null. Okay, using the select patient without setting anything, return nothing. And for the John Oliver, the place select a patient name is not triggered, and return. Don't forget to return this. Return nothing. And if it's past the ID is not null check, then we can use the set record of the ID. Okay, so let's select John Oliver. Okay, so now it's working. Let's reload this. Okay, select patient, show, please select a patient name, and selecting John Oliver, it shows the data. And selecting Bob Martin, so select the data, and pressing the next, Helena Fernandez, John Oliver again, back to John Oliver, Bob Martin, Helena Fernandez. Okay, so for the set record ID, okay, for the alert function, it's partially complete. And for the records.js, let me see if we miss something important. So let's run the test. Okay, so the test initial loading of the app, it's show alert on clicking show button if no patient is selected. We already did that earlier. Test getting patient details. Okay, this one is tricky. So clicking the next button should display next patient. Okay, so if we, let me show you something on the Explorer to get the better idea of the test file. Okay, let's find the test getting patient details on the it clause right here, since it's using just test getting patient details. Okay, this one. render app, patient name, get test ID, patient name. Let me divide the window. Where is the patient hyphen name? Patient hyphen name. Okay, this part. Patient hyphen name, it's working as expected. And for the show button, test ID show. Where is the test ID? Data hyphen test ID, find this show. If you're wondering which shortcut I am using right now, I'm using the Ctrl F to find the data, using to find the string of the code using the data test ID show. Okay, so for this one, onClick show data. Yeah, it's working as expected, I think. And this is the show button, target value of 1. Okay, for the target value of 1, we have the patient name of John Oliver. It's working as with the ID of 1, and they only have ID 1, 2, and then 3, so it's working as supposed to be in the show button. And then for the test ID of the patient profile, let's diagnose this patient profile. Let's copy this, check on the other part, which is the records.js, and find the patient profile data test ID. Patient profile query by test ID. This is the patient profile, and the JS file is checking on the patient profile right here, the patient name to be in the document. Patient table, the patient profile is already rendering successfully, and the patient table already rendered successfully, I believe. And then for the DOP, if you remember, DOP is in the form of a string, and the DOP is already passed right here, the DOP right here, using this 02 and then 01 and then 1986. And then for the height, it's only okay. For this one, it's only 168 centimeter. We haven't defined the centimeter yet, and it's not, if you look carefully on the description right here, it's not showing any centimeters right here on the description, so we should not believe fully on the description what it says, but instead we look over on the test file. And this one, app.test.js, this one is the one that either makes us pass the test or not. So we need to reference on this part, on this test file right here. For the height part, if we look over this one is on the records.js component. So for the user DOB, and let's pass in the centimeter right here, right away. Okay, so it's not the DOB. Oh my god, I'm writing on the wrong part. Okay, it's on the height part. It's supposed on the height part. Okay, so it's the same. Okay, it's now working as expected. Let's run the test again. Get test getting patient details. So we need to meticulously look for the different one, for the one that is out of the one we expected. Okay, so for the patient table, children to have text content, and the medical records right here. The medical record shows DSR have text content of the I+1, which is the index +1 that we already defined right here. Yeah, it's supposed to be index plus 1, and we already declared the index plus 1, and it's aligned perfectly. And for the second one of the table data, the children text content to match that rejects the regular expression. Which one is the regular expression? Oh, this one is the variable of the regular expression. It takes the digits, 2 digits, and then it's escaping of the backslashes, I think. And this one is also backslashes. Oh, this one is using the forward slashes, but on this part we are using the hyphen. So let's change the hyphen to the, since we are using the date converter of the converting the timestamp, we can declare the timestamp to change the return value from the hyphen to use the forward slashes. Okay, so let's run the test again. Okay, it's getting patient details for the preview. Let's see which one that we did wrong. Oh yeah, for the date rejects, if you look over this carefully, it takes 2 digits, and for this one we only takes 1 digit because we only have 2. Okay, only have 2 as the date right here. We are supposed to write 02 and then 08 and then the year, the full year. So in order to do that, we can use the .padStart, and then we don't have to declare right here .padStart. It's kinda ugly. You see the .padStart. The .padStart has not been showed yet on this recommendation. So in order to do that, we can use the getDate is in the form of number, so we can convert this, cast this into a string, and inside the string that takes the getDate, and then we can chain it with the .padStart. Okay, so .padStart is now showing as expected, and .padStart that takes the which one is the first parameter. The length is the number that fulfill the regex regular expression requirement right here. The number is 2 digits, and for the fill string, if it's an empty string, we can fill it with 0. So let's run this, show the John Oliver. Okay, for the date one, it's showing 02 instead of just 2, and then for the bottom one is also showing. Okay, for the next one, we can also do the same thing on the month format using the string, because the getMonth is considered a number, returning the number or the integer, so that's why we are using the +1 right here to align this offset by 1, and then using the .padStart also do the same thing, just like the date format, and passing the 0 right here. Let's display the John Oliver. Okay, so it's not working as expected. Let's run the test again. Okay, so it's very long for this particular tutorial. I'm sorry about the long tutorial and that I always blabbering nonsensical, and I always off track from the main purpose of this tutorial. Okay, so I hope you understand this video. If you have any better solution, you can write in the comment section, or if you have any question, you can also write in the comment section. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you on the next video. Goodbye.